Before it was the Hudson, it had another name, an ancient name that described its very essence, Mahikannituck, the water that is never still. For millennia, this valley was not a wilderness waiting to be discovered, but a home, cultivated and known. This was the heart of Lenapehoking, the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, and home to a confederacy known as the Wappinger. Their story here did not begin with the arrival of ships, but with the retreat of ice. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mount Goulion reveals a continuous presence stretching back at least 8,000, and perhaps as far as 12,000 years. From the end of the last ice age, their ancestors adapted to a changing world, moving from rock shelters to seasonal camps, and eventually to settled villages. Their domains stretched along the eastern banks of the Great River, from what is now Dutchess County south into the Bronx and eastward into the hills of Connecticut. They were the Easterners, a name reflected in the word Wappinger itself. They were part of a vast cultural and linguistic family, speaking an Eastern Algonquian dialect of Munsee Lenape, a language that connected them to peoples from the Delaware Bay to Long Island Sound. The Wappinger were not a single unified kingdom, but a loose confederacy of nearly 18 autonomous bands. Each was led by a sachem, who could be male or female, and a council of elders who governed through persuasion and consensus, not by force. This decentralized structure, which had ensured flexibility and local autonomy for centuries, would prove to be a profound vulnerability when faced with a centralized European power seeking to deal with a single authority. Colonists, accustomed to the authority of kings, would later exploit this system, negotiating land deals with individual leaders who had no power to speak for the entire people, sowing confusion and resentment. Their society was built on a sophisticated and sustainable relationship with the land. They were skilled farmers, cultivating corn, beans, and squash in communal fields. This was supplemented by hunting deer and bear, fishing for shad and herring, and gathering nuts and berries from the abundant forests. Their villages, composed of circular wigwams and larger, multi-family longhouses, were not permanent cities. After a decade or two, when the soil was tired and firewood scarce, a village would move, allowing the land to heal and regenerate. This way of life was rooted in a worldview fundamentally at odds with the European concept of ownership. The Wappinger believed all living things possessed a spirit, and that a great creator oversaw the cycles of life and nature. Land was not a commodity to be owned, but a relative to be lived with in a state of balance. This philosophy of sustainability was woven into the fabric of their society, a principle that would soon face a system built on extraction and permanent dominion. In 1609, a strange new vessel sailed up the Mahikannituck. It was the Half Moon, captained by Henry Hudson, and its arrival marked the beginning of the end for the Wappinger world as they knew it. The initial encounters were cautious, centered on trade. The Wappinger offered tobacco and furs in exchange for metal knives, beads, and other novelties. Soon, the Dutch West India Company established the colony of New Netherland, a commercial enterprise driven by one overriding obsession: the fur trade. European fashion's insatiable demand for beaver felt hats turned the forests of the Hudson Valley into a global resource depot. The Wappinger, skilled hunters and trappers, were drawn into this new economy. They traded pelts for goods that made life easier: brass kettles, steel axes, and firearms. But this new commerce came at a steep price. It created a cycle of dependency. As traditional tools and skills were replaced by European technology, the Wappinger became reliant on the very trade that was disrupting their society. To acquire more goods, they had to hunt more, leading to the overharvesting of beaver and deer, upsetting the ecological balance they had maintained for centuries. The introduction of firearms also escalated conflicts as the Dutch armed their allies, the Mohawk to the north, who then used that advantage to push south against the Wappinger and other Algonquian groups. An even deeper conflict was brewing, a fundamental clash of worlds over the very meaning of land. To the Dutch, land was a commodity, a piece of property that could be bought, sold, and owned forever by a single person. To the Wappinger, this was as alien as owning the air or the water. Land was a communal resource, a living entity to be shared. This misunderstanding was weaponized by the Dutch. Their colonial government required settlers to obtain a land deed from native leaders before a patent would be granted. On the surface, it appeared to be a legal process of purchase. But the Wappinger, when they accepted goods in exchange for signing a piece of paper, believed they were engaging in a traditional gift exchange, granting the Dutch the right to use or share the land, not to own it exclusively and permanently. This legalistic process was a tool of dispossession, turning a cultural chasm into a state-sanctioned land grab. But the most lethal invaders were invisible. Smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases that had swept through Europe for centuries, were completely new to the Americas. With no immunity, the Wappinger and their neighbors were defenseless. Epidemics tore through their villages, killing thousands and wiping out entire communities long before any major war was fought. This great dying catastrophically weakened the Wappinger, leaving them vulnerable to the pressures that were about to intensify into open, brutal warfare. In 1638, a new Director General arrived in New Netherland, Willem Kieft. Ambitious and belligerent, he saw the surrounding native peoples not as partners, but as obstacles. One of his first acts was to demand a protection tax, a tribute of corn, wampum, and furs from the Wappinger and other local tribes. The sachems refused. They were not Dutch subjects and had no need of Dutch protection. Kieft's aggression escalated. He used the theft of a few pigs as a pretext to launch a punitive raid against the Raritans, killing several people. His actions created a climate of fear and hostility, even among his own colonists, who formed a council of advisors that urged patience and diplomacy. Kieft ignored them. The crisis reached a tipping point in the winter of 1643. Hundreds of Wappinger and Tappan people, fleeing attacks from the powerful Mohawk, a tribe the Dutch had been arming to secure their fur trade interests, sought refuge near the Dutch settlements. They camped at Pavonia, now Jersey City, and Corlear's Hook on Manhattan, trusting in their alliance with the Dutch for safety. Kieft saw not a humanitarian crisis, but a strategic opportunity. He had helped create the instability by arming the Mohawk, and now he would use the vulnerability of the refugees as a pretext for their annihilation. On the night of February 25th, 1643, Kieft unleashed his soldiers. Ignoring the pleas of his council, he ordered surprise attacks on the sleeping refugee camps. At Pavonia and Corlear's Hook, Dutch soldiers fell upon the unsuspecting men, women, and children. The slaughter was horrific. David Peters de Vries, a colonist who had argued against the war, wrote a chilling eyewitness account. He described infants torn from their mothers' breasts and hacked to pieces. He wrote of parents and children thrown into the icy river to drown. In all, over 120 people were murdered in a single night. Kieft's massacres did not intimidate the local tribes. They enraged them. The surviving bands of the Wappinger Confederacy united and launched retaliatory strikes against Dutch farms and settlements. In response, Kieft hired a notorious Indian fighter, Captain John Underhill, a veteran of the genocidal Pequot War in New England. In March of 1644, Underhill led a combined force of Dutch and English soldiers on a winter campaign. They were led to a large Wappinger village near modern-day Pound Ridge, where several bands had gathered for a winter festival, believing they were in a place of safety. Under the light of a full moon, Underhill's forces surrounded the village and attacked. In a terrifying repeat of the tactics he used against the Pequot, Underhill ordered the village set ablaze, trapping the inhabitants inside. Between 500 and 700 Wappinger, mostly women, children, and elders, were burned alive or shot as they tried to flee. A Dutch account noted with chilling detachment that not one was heard to cry or to scream. By the time the war ended in 1645, more than 1,600 Wappinger and their allies were dead. Their confederacy was shattered. The survivors were scattered, forced to abandon their homeland and seek refuge among other tribes. Kieft's war was not a conflict between two armies. It was a campaign of terror designed to eliminate a people and seize their land. After the English took control of the colony from the Dutch in 1664, the sword was replaced by the pen as the primary weapon of dispossession. The new colonial government granted vast tracts of Wappinger land to wealthy and powerful families, codifying the theft in legal documents called patents. The Phillips patent was one of the most egregious. In 1697, the merchant Adolphus Philipse acquired a deed for a modest tract of land. He then used political influence and fraudulent surveys to expand his claim to over 200,000 acres, encompassing nearly all of the remaining Wappinger heartland. To the north, the Great Nine Partners patent consumed another huge swath of territory, boxing in the few remaining Wappinger communities. But the Wappinger would not be erased without a fight. Their resistance found a voice in their last great Sachem, Daniel Nimham. A skilled diplomat and a respected warrior, Nimham refused to accept the theft of his people's homeland. In a remarkable turn, he decided to fight the colonists within their own system, the law. In the 1760s, Nimham filed a legal claim against the Philipse family. He and his attorney argued that the massive patent was based on a fraudulent deed and that the Wappinger had never sold nor authorized the sale of that vast territory. But the colonial courts were controlled by the very same class of wealthy landowners who had benefited from these patents. His case was dismissed. Unbowed, Nimham embarked on an extraordinary journey. In 1766, he led a delegation of Wappinger and Mohican leaders to London to appeal directly to the king. It was a brilliant political move, an attempt to use the authority of the British Empire to check the power of its colonial elite. And it nearly worked. The Lords of Trade in London were sympathetic. They reviewed the evidence and acknowledged the frauds and abuses of the colonial government, ordering the governor of New York to give the Wappinger a fair hearing. But back in New York, the landed gentry closed ranks. At the new hearing in 1767, the council once again ruled against Nimham. Their reasoning laid bare the true nature of colonial justice. A ruling in favor of the Wappinger, they argued, would open a door to the greatest mischiefs, threatening the legitimacy of countless other land grants across the province. The law was not a tool for justice, it was a shield to protect the spoils of conquest. For Daniel Nimham and his people, the legal path to reclaim their home was closed. The only path that remained was war. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, the Wappinger faced a difficult choice. For Daniel Nimham, the path was clear. The great landlords, like the Philipse family, were loyalists, siding with the British crown. The revolution offered one last desperate gamble. By allying with the Patriots, the Wappinger could fight against their direct oppressors. Perhaps a victorious new nation, founded on the ideals of liberty, would finally grant them justice and restore their stolen lands. The surviving Wappinger, who had taken refuge in the Christianized native community of Stockbridge, Massachusetts, formed a unique military unit, the Stockbridge Militia. This company of Mohican, Wappinger, and Munsee soldiers was one of the first Native American units to fight for the Continental Army. Led by Daniel Nimham's son, Abraham, they served with distinction from the very beginning of the war, fighting at the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Saratoga, and enduring the harsh winter at Valley Forge. In the summer of 1778, the Stockbridge Company was assigned to the most dangerous front of the war, the neutral ground in Westchester County. This was a brutal, lawless no-man's land between the British Army in New York City and the American lines to the north. Here they served as an elite force of scouts and light infantry, their skills in woodland warfare proving invaluable to the American cause. But their effectiveness made them a target. The British commander of the Queen's Rangers, Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe, a cunning and ruthless officer, became determined to eliminate them. On August 31st, 1778, Simcoe set a deliberate and deadly trap. In what is now Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, he lured the Stockbridge militia into an ambush. The battle, known as the Battle of Kingsbridge or the Stockbridge Massacre, was a slaughter. Outnumbered more than 8-1, the Stockbridge warriors were surrounded. According to one account, the elder Daniel Nimham, knowing the end was near, cried out to his men that he was old and would stand and die there. He was cut down by a British cavalryman. His son Abraham, the company's captain, was also killed. They fought with ferocious bravery, but they were overwhelmed. This was not just a military defeat, it was a decapitating blow to a people. In a single afternoon, nearly 40 of the 60 warriors in the company were killed. The Wappinger lost their Sachem, his heir, and an entire generation of their men. Their leadership and their ability to fight for their rights were destroyed in the fields of the Bronx. After the war, General George Washington would praise the Stockbridge warriors, saying, "They have fought and bled by our side, that we consider them as friends and brothers." But these were empty words. The new United States government did not honor their sacrifice by restoring their land. The confiscated estates of the loyalist Phillipse family were not returned to the Wappinger, but sold to American settlers, cementing their dispossession. In the ultimate tragic irony, the Wappinger had been destroyed fighting for the birth of a nation that would have no place for them in their own home. The story of the Wappinger did not end in the fires of war or the tragedy of betrayal. It transformed into a story of survival, a long journey of displacement and resilience. After the Revolution, the shattered remnants of the Stockbridge community, including the few surviving Wappinger, were pushed out of their homes in Massachusetts. In the 1780s, they accepted an invitation from the Oneida Nation and relocated to their lands in central New York.